Hey, this is Rob. This is episode 119 of the Folly Coffee Podcast. Let's get it brewing. All right.
Nice. I've always wanted to be 119.
I am here with Ali Kaplan, editor-in-chief at Twin Cities Business, host of the By All Means podcast and Shop Girls myTalk 107, as well as the VP of content at, what was it called? Minneapolis Communications?
MSP Communications is our company.
MSP Communications. So you're doing a lot.
I have, I'm big on multitasking. What can I tell you?
And we're kind of reversing the mic on you today. Yeah. And I've listened to your podcast and looking at some of the guests I have. Again, this is one of those moments where I go, what are you doing here? How did I get you on the Folly Coffee Podcast? But excited to have you here.
I am delighted to be here. And I mean, you are awesome. I mean, I totally reached out to you having never met you or talked to you before. I had seen the coffee and thought, hey, this is going to be perfect in our new magazine, Start MN. Called you and you actually answered. And then we had this awesome conversation. And then, I mean, that's the beauty, I think, of being in journalism and kind of what you're experiencing with podcasting, that you can just reach out to people and then have amazing conversations.
And that is the funniest part of it, is people go like, how do you get guests? I go, almost every time it's a DM or an email, a few times usually. I just ask.
Right.
And we're just talking about as we walked in the door, that's kind of funny how like the more episodes you have or the more you do it, the more established it becomes. And then just the credibility speaks for itself, even though I have a very small listenership, that it's like, okay, at the very least, this is going on, so it's a real thing.
I would say at 119 episodes, it's a real thing.
But I'm excited because I'm going to dig into what you said of like you found Folly, because that still to this day is like weird for me to be like, how did you find it? I want to dig into that and kind of go into kind of your role as editor at Twin Cities Business Magazine. But I wanted to first just kind of start on like how you got into it in the first place, going all the way back. I saw you went to school for journalism. Is this always something you've wanted to do?
Yeah, I'm one of those weirdos who just kind of always knew I was sort of a nosy kid. And so my parents said, I like to write, I like to ask a lot of questions. And journalism became like, oh, this is a way I could actually do this and maybe make a living. As it turns out, not a great living, but it is an actual career path. So I started really early. I mean, I was always writing stories as a kid. I was on my high school newspaper, and I majored in journalism in college.
So you graduate college. What are kind of your first steps? Did you have like an idea of what you wanted to do or the type of place you wanted to work? Or was it kind of just like, I just need to find a journalism job coming out of school?
Well, I'm pretty old, Rob. And so things were a little different. This was, pre-social media, pre-everything. Yeah. And so it was sort of like you majored. I went to the University of Wisconsin Madison, great journalism school. I'm now on the board. And, you chose print, you chose broadcast, PR, or advertising. Mm-hmm. That was it. And they were all distinct different paths and they didn't really overlap. Today, everything is blurry and it's totally different. I wanted to be a newspaper person. I mean, I wanted to work at a newspaper, and I figured I would just work my way up from one to the next. So I started out at a newspaper in Chicago, the Daily Herald newspaper. Mm-hmm. And then I eventually came back to the Twin Cities, where I grew up, to work for the St. Paul Pioneer Press at a really exciting time. They had just won their third Pulitzer, and there were a lot of rock stars in that newsroom, and they were scrappy and the underdog, which I always liked, but they were very highly regarded, especially on the feature staff, and I came in on the feature staff.
So as a part of that staff, what was your role? Are you going out and finding stories? Do you have stories given to you? How does that whole process work in that role?
Yeah, I mean, you're expected to come up with, especially in features, it's not typical to join a newsroom in features. I mean, at least when you're, young and starting out. So yes, I mean, I was expected to be generating ideas. I wanted to write a column, and so I just started doing it. And somehow that worked. And so I sort of I was supposed to be doing kind of like consumer related stuff. It kind of morphed into being, the kind of the style and retail reporter. And and columnist and all things lifestyle.
And so you just brought it to them saying, I'm going to do this. I want to do this.
Kinda.
And when these types of things fascinate me when you're trying to pitch an idea. Did you come with the idea fully formed? Did you have an example of an article that you would write or like kind of the things you would be covering?
So when I was in Chicago, I kind of worked my way up from covering, like city council meetings and park districts and all the stuff you have to do. I also did a stint at the Milwaukee Sentinel where I was I was listening to the police scanner and I'd hear, shots fired, and I'd run out to the scene in my little white Acura Integra without a cell phone. But anyway, so I worked my way up at the Daily Herald to a beat that was called Time and Pocketbooks. And I was like, what am I supposed to do? And they said, really, what they wanted me to do was find enterprise stories about how we spend our time and how we spend our money. And that really clicked for me. And I've always been fascinated by the psychology of why we buy what we buy, what we like, trends, consumer behavior. And so that was kind of the angle. I don't think I was a typical, fashion writer in that it wasn't just about I like clothes and, doing a runway show is fun, but I really liked kind of the method behind it. How is it that all the designers are doing plaid this season? How does that happen?
Yeah.
What is, what are the steps that transpire to bring that to market?
And fashion's a super interesting in my mind. You can probably tell I'm not a hugely fashionable guy. I'm the jeans and T-shirt kind of guy every day. Wear a hat so I don't have to worry about my hair. But it's like a chicken or the egg situation with fashion for me, and this could probably apply to a lot of products and industries and trends. In your opinion, with your experience in the fashion industry, do you find that it's a lot of customer driven, that, this is becoming popular, so we're going to start designing towards that? Because you mentioned that. It's how is it that everybody's wearing plaid now?
Isn't that crazy? I still think it's fascinating how it happens. I mean, I think it's changed so much. I think years ago and before social media, it was much more dictated from the top. It was the luxury, fashion houses. They would start the trend. Then it would begin to trickle down to mainstream. We would see photos months later in magazines. I mean, it's so hard to realize how much slower things moved before digital and before social media. Today, I think that it's much more democratic. I think the consumers are in the driver's seat. I think that, fashion brands can tell us we can't wear skinny jeans anymore, but people are like, damn it, I love my skinny jeans. And so people will keep brands will keep making them because they know there's still going to be an audience for it. So it's sort of anything goes.
And how long were you in that role, and what was the next step in kind of the progression of your journalism career?
So while I was at the Pioneer Press, I don't know, probably close to 10 years probably. While I was there, I launched my own brand. I launched Ali Shops. And the earliest iteration of it, I wanted to create, it was kind of early days of, media organizations figuring out digital. And at that time, a story would go up on the website for a week and then it would disappear. And that was the end of it. And that didn't make a lot of sense to me, especially with what I was writing, because I was writing about there's this cute new boutique that you should, and it's and here's this local brand that you should support and things like that. And that's relevant to you, not today because it was printed in the paper. It's relevant to you the day that you want to go shopping. And so I wanted to create a directory of, where to shop, so that you could go by city, so you could go by category. You could find all the cool men's stores, all the cool stores in Wayzata or St. Louis Park or wherever. And so I brought it to the editor who was like, that is a great idea, and we're never going to do it. I was like, I'm like, well, I am. And I'd like to keep working here, but I really want to be able to do this. And they let me. And at that time, everyone in the newsroom was like, what? They're going to let you do us? Side hustles weren't really okay. It was something you sort of kept, secret and hoped you didn't get fired for it. But I got it all signed, sealed, and the deal was, my editor was just like, you can't be involved in sales. If this website is going to be supported by sales, you can't be involved. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want to be involved. I mean, it's the same model to me as a newspaper. I'm just doing it, more specifically focused on retail and for an online reader. And so I did it.
And as you're doing that, is that something that you're going to these shop and store owners, the places that you're profiling? Are you going to the owners and saying, hey, I want to cover this? Or is it something that you're just going in, doing a review, and then they find out that you were reviewing their shop or putting up this post?
I mean, you know, I already was doing it for the newspaper, so I was already like totally in the know and, you know, kind of knew what was going on. Generally, I like to talk to people when I'm writing about them and get the backstory and everything. So it's not really like a, you know, it wasn't so much reviews in the sense of restaurant reviews, you know, like where you're criticizing. It was more like, hey, this is, if I didn't have anything nice to say, I generally just didn't say anything. If I don't want to point people there, I just won't write about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, yes, I would generally talk to people, and it was kind of a mix. I always thought, and I still to this day can't believe when people don't utilize the media. If you're launching a brand or a product and you're not reaching out to reporters, that's crazy. It's the best validation you can get. You know, even today in the age of influencers, there's still nothing that compares to when people see it in print or they see it, you know, from a news source. They're like, oh, wow. Okay, well, this must be legit. So, you know, people knew to reach out to me and still do. But yeah, you got to be on the street too. And a lot of times it was just discovery.
Yeah, and that's a really kind of layered subject about the importance of print and digital. And so I kind of use print for like established establishments, business. What would you call the newspaper? Publication. That's the word I'm looking for.
Sure.
With established publications, whether it's on the website or whether it's put into print, the amount of lift you see as a small business versus like a post that goes viral or whatever, it's so much more effective. And I've done a lot of thinking on that, is like, how can we have this follower base? How can we have a video get this many views and you see very little tangible lift?
Yep.
That's embarrassing.
I'm glad it's you, not me.
Yeah. Well, I don't even know why the ringer was on today. Anyway, I'll restart my thought there. That the established credible publications, that when you're in there, the amount of credibility it almost lends to it, because it's funny you should mention side hustles, because you were like, you didn't want it to be something that you were, or not a lot of people had them.
Yeah.
Whereas today, it's like, people just assume what's your side hustle. In fact, I've seen the inverse effect where they go, what do you do? I have a coffee roaster. They go, okay, what do you do for your job? I'm like,
seriously?
Yeah, because I go, I do that, and they're like, oh, so it's like, are you full time? Because it's like these days everybody has a business that they're working on. Everybody seems to have a side hustle or something that they're doing outside of their actual work. So it's funny to hear you say that at a time that it was like you almost had to hide it or you had to keep it on the down low.
Very much so.
And it's not something that you were very frontwards about.
Yeah.
And so would you categorize Ali Shops as a blog? Or
yeah, I mean, in its earliest, no, I wouldn't say blog. I mean, it was really it was a digital directory.
Yeah.
It was a resource that I wanted people to be able to use on the go. You know, whether it was on their phones early. I mean, we were pre-smartphone when pre-iPhone, but you know, people were starting to have phones. But at least for their planning purposes, you're going to go to St. Paul today. You want to know the cool men's stores. You would go on Ali Shops. You would filter it, and you would get a list of the cool places to go.
Was there something that inspired you to do that? Had you seen a similar model done, or was it something that you just saw missing?
I saw that it was missing, and I couldn't believe that nobody was doing it. That it just seemed so obvious to me because I was writing about these places, but there was just no good way, short of like clipping things out of the newspaper and saving them. It just didn't make any sense to me that we weren't utilizing the internet. To me, it was like the perfect application for the website.
It's funny to hear you say that, because it's like, that seems like such a normal thing these days.
Don't I sound like I'm 110 years old? I mean, this was,
I was trying to dance around that, but I go,
like this was probably, so this was like early 2000s, right? This was, I think Ali Shops launched, I don't know, was it like I should have looked on my LinkedIn before I came here.
2006.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, 2006. So yeah, I mean, it was right before the iPhone, and it's just, I think it really is staggering to think how much things have changed since then. At that time, like I said, I mean, the website, newspapers made big mistakes early on. They were very slow to figure out how to, share their content online. And a lot of them aren't in business anymore because of that. And I think there's still a lot of like, wow, maybe we shouldn't have given our content away to start with. And how do you recover from that? It's changed, but I mean, it was very slow.
When you started Ali Shops, how did you kind of launch it? Now, you've already mentioned that if you're starting a new business, a new enterprise, and you're not reaching out to reporters, that's a mistake. Is that what you did when you launched?
A little bit. I mean, I knew people because I was in the media, so I utilized that. But the funny thing happened at the exact same time. So I had been going on radio shows. I would get called. Here's another little secret of media. With broadcasters, they read the newspapers, and that's where they get a lot of their stories. Now they read websites, but I would get calls frequently about stories that I was doing in the newspaper, and they'd say, oh, do you want to come on and talk about that? And so I became kind of a regular on a station that was new at the time called myTalk 107.1, which was all about kind of pop culture on the radio, talk radio for women that wasn't news, wasn't sports. It was kind of lifestyle, brought to the airwaves. They said, hey, would you want to do a show about shopping and style, all the things you're doing in print? And I thought, I'm going to launch this brand. How am I going to get this brand off the ground? It all kind of happened at the same time. So I started a radio show, and really the reason I started it was to promote Ali Shops.
And how quickly did you see the traction with Ali Shops? Was it feedback that was generated from people using the site? Or did you have a way at the time of even tracking kind of what the traffic was, what kind of followership or whatever it was at the time?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was like obsessed with the numbers. I still am today. I'm an analytics junkie. And I think that's what I love so much about digital. And, obviously web is very much a part of what I'm doing today with Twin Cities Business. But I just love that you can literally see in real time, if something is catching on. And sometimes it's not what you think it's going to be. But yeah, I was definitely following the numbers. I launched an email, to kind of, and that's a model that we still follow of a way to generate traffic. And it did catch on, and it developed, and I'm not going to say it was enormous, but it developed a pretty decent audience, and we had advertising, and it was a nice little side hustle, and it was nice enough that Minneapolis St. Paul Magazine kind of wanted to shut it down because they were starting to think about, directories and guides at the very same time. And so it was kind of me against them. And so I started talking to them. And it took 3 times, because the first couple times what they wanted to do, they wanted me to come work for them, to come work for Minneapolis St. Paul Magazine and put Ali Shops out of business. And I was like, no, I kind of want to keep doing this. And so finally, on the 3rd time around, they were like, fine, bring Ali Shops with you. And so that's what I did. And so I eventually went to Minneapolis St. Paul Magazine, brought my guide, we kind of integrated it with theirs. Ali Shops did become kind of my blog within Minneapolis St. Paul Magazine.
That's when you know you're doing something right. It's when somebody wants to hire you and you have to wonder when they're approaching you saying you have to shut it down. Then you go, are you hiring me just to put this thing away,
right,
just to get rid of this? And then what happens if I get rid of it and then I'm hired and then it turns out that was your main primary focus on hiring me in the first place?
Yeah.
Plus, I have to imagine that having built a following and built a platform that didn't really exist, especially for the area, that would have been a really difficult thing to do, to shut it down, even if the job was super alluring, because it's like, what about all the work that's gone into this? Are we just going to start from scratch? Why not integrate it into what you're already doing and bring over the following of people that recognize the Ali Shops name, that you've built credibility with, that you have a good understanding of what they're looking for? And so when you brought it over to MSP Magazine, did that change at all what Ali Shops was, or did you continue to do it the same?
Yeah, it did. I mean, we had a lot of conversations about, well, what is this in the context of Minneapolis St. Paul? And I mean, I wasn't delusional. I mean, obviously Minneapolis St. Paul was a bigger brand, it's celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. I wasn't that old. And so, I wanted to be respectful of that. And so I think we found a pretty good way of, me and my voice fitting within that. And I think that's one of the things Minneapolis St. Paul does so well, is kind of provide a platform for a lot of really big voices, you know, people like Stephanie March, who's a giant in the food scene, or Dara Moskowitz-Grumdahl, you know, and so we let Minneapolis St. Paul take the lead. You know, they had a weekly shopping and style email that was called Swag at the time. And we're like, oh, should we change this? And I was like, no, you know, leave it. But we used my voice and used Ali Shops. Like when I was breaking news, when I wanted to, you know, do a commentary, that was under my Ali Shops blog. So it was clear that it was me.
And how did you jump from there to what you're doing now with Twin Cities Business? Not only just your editor-in-chief role, but also the podcast. It looks like you're still hosting regularly on 107.1.
I know.
So how did that role at MSP end up evolving into what you're doing now?
I have this really bad habit of taking on new things and forgetting to get out of the old things. This is like it's a real problem. So yeah, I mean, you know, in my time at Minneapolis St. Paul, I started out as the Shopping and Style, the senior editor of Shopping and Style. Had a ton of fun. I think it was I was there when American heritage brands were really, you know, on the rise. The days of, do you remember Northern Grade? Do you remember that pop? It was kind of like one of the first big pop-up markets.
Oh yeah, yeah.
With Red Wing and all the Minnesota, you know, it's kind of that moment, which was so cool and impactful, and like, you know, Wall Street Journal and other places are looking at us like, what's going on in Minnesota? So it was really fun to cover all of that. I think local started to become more important, and I was a really big advocate of, you know, kind of celebrating our local brands in addition to local stores and all that. So we did a lot of fun stuff. I also wrote features, and I mean, look, I'm a journalist and a storyteller at heart. So whether it's about shopping or something else, you know, I love to tell stories. And I was a contributor to Twin Cities Business. So we're the same company. So, you know, Twin Cities Business and Minneapolis St. Paul are Cities Media Group, which is a division of MSP Communications. There's also an agency too. And, you know, I was contributing there, and there was an opening, and they said, hey, you know, would you ever consider? And I had never considered. I was not on my radar. I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't aspiring to go, you know, to even be an editor-in-chief. I liked writing. I liked being the doer, not the manager. That was not something that I felt like I needed to move into that role. But suddenly it became like, you know, maybe that would be kind of intriguing. I think it seemed like a weirder jump to some people who knew me as like the fashion person, you know, putting on Fashionopolis and doing all these events, than it did to me, because to me, whether you're whatever industry you're writing about, it's all business. And, you know, a store, a brand, those are businesses. And I approached it that way. I approached retail reporting that way. And so to kind of just cast a wider net and look at it in a bigger way, it didn't seem that different to me. Now, leading and being like in charge of a team, that was really the big difference for me that I had to figure out internally. But it was a really cool opportunity, and Twin Cities Business had an amazing staff of total kick-ass veterans, and it was really, you know, it's been great. It's been over 3 years now.
That's a really good transition into kind of the questions I had about how, I know this is going to sound stupid, but it's like how the news works. Because I'm sure every organization, every type of publication, every focus of what the publication is about would change how you approach the news and what becomes newsworthy. But as editor-in-chief, this is probably a big part of your life, is how do you decide what is newsworthy? Like, how do you find the stories? What subjects are you looking for? How do you make sure that the stuff you're bringing to the readers is stuff that they'll be interested in?
Yeah, good question. I mean, that is a daily, hourly, minute-to-minute conversation. And I think in some ways it's almost a little trickier for a monthly magazine maybe than a newspaper. Because in a newspaper, it's sort of like anything that seems like news is news, and you're, you know, just constantly churning it out. We have to be a little more thoughtful for a couple reasons. Number one, we've got a limited number of pages, and number two, you know, we're working months and months in advance, and so we've got to think like, well, is this still going to be relevant? What is our, you know, what's our take take on it? What are we adding to the conversation that isn't already going to be covered in a daily newspaper? That's why our website is so important, because that's our opportunity to keep the conversation going in between print issues. But I think for Twin Cities, you got to know the mission of the publication you work for. And for Twin Cities Business, it's always been about going beyond the headlines and to kind of examine why it matters and what the impact is on our community and on business, and taking kind of Twin Cities Business started at a time when business was kind of a bad word. It was before the era that we're in now, where it's like it's so cool to be an entrepreneur and everybody and everybody has an Instagram account about their business. Yep. That wasn't the time. I think then it was sort of like business was kind of evil and money grabbing, and all the coverage my predecessors, the founders of Twin Cities Business, felt like was just really negative. Like it was kind of this gotcha attitude, and so they didn't want to be the Chamber of Commerce. I mean, they wanted to do journalism, but with an attitude that, like, business stories are interesting stories. They're stories of leadership. They're stories of innovation. There are stories of entrepreneurship. And that was kind of the attitude of Twin Cities Business. And I think that really carries through still today.
And it seems like with the advent of social media and just the level of transparency that is available for people to seek out if they're looking for it, that I have to imagine part of the shift in the public's kind of perception of business is that prior to social media, prior to even like Google or being able to search anything you wanted to look for about any product you're purchasing, anything you're consuming, the only narrative you received was the one coming straight from the company or anything that was being covered about it, in which case a lot of companies would probably make sure that if they're getting covered, that it comes out as rosy as possible. And then as things start to come out, you're going, am I getting the right story? Has this company just been telling me what they're about? But then as social media, blogs, like you said, directories are now just like, you can find a directory for just about anything, right, that the public's perception of business changes, because you start to realize that, especially with the increase in popularity of local businesses, that like, oh, it's just people running these businesses. And most people, especially on the small business side, tend to start it out of a passion. I don't know a ton of small business owners, especially, you said you have passed in the fashion industry, but especially in food and beverage. You don't find a lot of people that start it just because they go, oh, here's a good opportunity, I'm going to see if I can take it. The change in the reputation of business now is kind of like taking pride in it. And the entrepreneur, right. I kind of hate the word entrepreneur because even that has a weird stigma now. But I have to imagine that the transparency between all of that has changed the perception of business. Is the local aspect something that you have always focused on? Is it something that you're trying to focus on more now that the public demands it? Because that's another chicken or the egg situation. Did demand for local goods increase and then the popularity increased, or did the awareness of it increase, whether it's social media or someone like Twin Cities Business Magazine changing the perception?
That's a great question. I mean, yeah, I think to your point, everything, there's a person behind everything. It might take some layers with bigger companies to get to it, but at the end of the day, it's all about humans and stories, and big companies used to be small companies. And somewhere along the line, even if you have to go back 100 years, there was one person who had a really big idea. And I love that. And I love thinking about that and thinking about figuring out what that idea was and how they grew it. As far as local, I don't know. That really is a chicken and egg kind of thing. I mean, I guess both. Maybe that's a cop-out answer, but I think that as more people started telling their stories about, hey, I'm making coffee because I saw this opportunity and I'm right here. And if you are buying my coffee, you're supporting a company that's based in my community. I just think that message started to resonate more with people. And I think that it's funny. I mean, the American Heritage Movement was really part of that, and kind of understanding where the goods and services and materials come from and how that literally impacts your neighbors.
And the local kind of branding has now become its own thing, to the point where I think it's almost to a fault. Now you see, and this happened a lot during COVID, you see it too. This might be a hot take of mine, but I don't think that being local should be your number one kind of benefit to the customer. And I think that all the benefits of being local should be focused on. And I think some of those were brought to the forefront during COVID when a lot of small businesses were struggling, that especially like with food and beverage, with what we do, freshness really matters. So why is buying local better for that? Well, because we make it really close. It doesn't have to exchange a bunch of hands. If you're a local small business and you're succeeding, it's probably because you have a good product. And that's where I go, don't buy us because we're local. Buy us because it's really good and we're local.
Sure.
It's all the money goes back into your own local economy. We try as much as possible to work with local businesses, with our suppliers. And that's kind of the advice I give to a lot of people that lean in too much to buy us because we're local. We're local. You go, yeah, but so are all your other competitors in the area. What is it that you're doing differently?
That's a really good point. Yeah, there's that. It should be a bonus, not the whole reason. There's got to be another compelling reason why people are going to buy the product.
Now you've been doing your podcast for, you said you started in 2019, so 2 to 3 years at this point.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, I have a long history in audio at this point, and broadcasting and just kind of multimedia. And I love it. I mean, kind of like you, I think it's such a great storytelling platform, and it's just kind of a new option to have in the arsenal as we think about storytelling in a broad way. And so I just thought it was important. I thought we could do it. And MSP hadn't really delved into it. We had been talking about it, but as you got to have the mics, you got to have, it takes time and all that. And it just seemed like business in particular really lent itself to some great conversations. So I just did it.
You've had some really incredible guests on your podcast. If you're listening and you're into local business, which you probably are if you're listening to this podcast at this point, some of the guests on your podcast have been some of the best coming out of Minnesota, with some of the best products, some of the most like innovative entrepreneurs through all different types of industries. I'm curious, with all the guests you've had, with all the success they've had, have you noticed any familiar trends or themes among your guests? I know there's tons of different personalities and tons of different strategies, and every industry has its own challenges, but I love to find consistent themes across people who find success and try to like distill that down to, have you found any of these themes with all these amazing guests that you've had on your podcast?
I think the seeing a problem and feeling compelled to solve it is just, kind of runs through everyone and everything. I think there are some cases where people knew from the time they were young that's what they wanted to do, and so they were looking for a problem to solve. In other cases, not at all, but it was just like, it's just something became obvious to them and they had to go fix it. And I love that mentality and that drive and that kind of like, I might be working in a garage, and all the cliches really prove true time and time again. And just having that kind of focus and drive and get it done kind of attitude.
It almost seems to me like there's two major ways to start a business. One would be you see this glaring blank space in the market and you go, oh, I could start a business in this, especially if it's something you're interested in. Usually if you notice a blank space in the market, it's probably something you're researching or interested in the first place. Or it's the flip side, that you're super passionate about something and you go, I want to start this as a business. Now, in the case of Folly, fortunate for me, I was super passionate about it. Then as I looked into kind of the Midwest, I go, oh, I think there is a bit of a blank space here.
Yeah.
But especially for the guests you've had with the mega success they've had in the different types of businesses they have, it seems to me like if the blank space is the first thing you notice, and then you decide how is the best way to provide a solution that fills the space, it seems that the upside has a much higher potential in business. Whereas like what Folly is kind of like, oh, there's still space here. It's not I know we're not doing rocket science, but you go, it seems to me that the ceiling is a little harder to get to because of increased competition when the idea is not quite as like, I already had in mind what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And then will it work with the timing versus here's a big blank space. let me find the most innovative solution and the most unique solution to this that doesn't currently exist.
But I think it's interesting because the most recent episode we did was with Robbie Harrell of Minnesota Ice. Yeah. And so we do this thing after our interview with our entrepreneur or business leader, then we have a conversation. We go, quote unquote, back to the classroom with a professor from the University of St. Thomas, from the business school. And we were talking about how, literally his product is ice. I mean, like anybody can make ice, like when you really stop to think about it. And the professor was saying, while we hear about the businesses that are like this mind-blowing idea that you're like, you hear it and then you're like, why didn't I think of that? But because you didn't, that guy did. And that's why he's a billionaire now. But, it's really hard to find those. It's really hard to invent something new. Far more businesses, even entrepreneurial ventures like yours, are finding a new angle on something that exists. And that's what most small businesses and even medium-sized businesses are. And there's tons of room, as you are proving out, in that space to just do something, but do it a little better, do it with a twist. And I think one of the dangers of this time we're in, it's such an exciting time. There's so much money out there. There's opportunity. The paths are clearer, how you can, take an idea from that just crazy idea to actually turning it into a business, the accelerators and incubators. I mean, none of that stuff existed 10, 15 years ago. But I think one of the downsides of it is it can make you a little crazy too, right? Because you feel like if I don't come up with some breakthrough brand new idea, I'm a failure. And that's really dangerous.
And with social media, you're getting fed that every single day. And with any free time you have, especially with like TikTok, where it is that algorithm, if you're at all interested in business, it somehow is going to know that you're interested and you're going to be fed all these life hacks. And look how easy I'm at 6 figures a month with this simple business idea. And you're like, how am I not doing anything yet?
Right.
But even just the simple thing you said about that starting something and just doing it a little differently or having an idea in mind as to how it could be different. When we spoke on the phone for the feature, that was really what Folly was built on, was the simple idea. It's like, could we do the same quality of coffee, but do it in a way that's approachable and not pretentious?
Right.
And so in my mind, I'm thinking of the product itself and going, it's not terribly unique. Like, we do source some really great, unique coffees that maybe no one else is roasting at the time. But the approach is kind of different. And so it's good to hear you say and the Minnesota Ice is maybe the perfect example of like, they're making ice.
Right.
And they've built, I think you said on the podcast, a $10 million business.
Isn't that crazy?
So if you want to look at an example of being like, my idea is not unique enough, you'd be like, he's selling ice and he's made an insanely successful business through that. And that's a really great example where you go, if you think you have to have this insanely once in a lifetime, once in a generation idea to have a successful business, if you can just have good strategy with a simple but effective product, that can be as successful as any other innovative, great idea, especially if it's not executed properly.
Exactly.
Now, I want to go back to a thing you said, that if you're starting a new business, if you're launching a new product, it would be foolish not to reach out to the media.
Mm-hmm.
What are your best practices for reaching out to the media? Because I'm sure you're inundated with DMs, with emails, with, I've got the hottest new thing you've got to write about. What would be your best practices for someone looking to just get coverage on a new business or product?
That is a great question. I'm always accepting emails. I think email is really still the best way. I don't really want to be messaged on Facebook about it because there are too many different streams to keep track of these days. I mean, I don't mind if someone doesn't know my email and they reached out to me on Instagram and ask where to send it, and I'll tell them. But email is really the best place. And I think what you want to do is just tell me. I don't need a book about it, but like, tell me why I should care. What is it? Make sure you give me the basics. And I don't even care if it's in, a press release form. I mean, I think it's pretty easy these days to get a few examples and see what common practices are. But literally what I need to know, what I'm looking for in every pitch that I receive is, what is it? What's the timing of it? Is there a time peg? Is this something that's happening next week or, that makes it fresh or newsy? What's different about it? Who are the players? Does it impact my community or my coverage area? And then don't send me like a 70 megabyte photo. Tell me that photos are available. I want to know that. And especially if it's something for online. I mean, this is really like, this is not something I would have included in a journalism class a few years ago. But today, just keep in mind that no news outlet is posting anything without a photo. So it's really helpful, especially if you're in a product kind of business, to have them available. If you're going to pitch me on your new coffee blend that's launching next week, and you're thinking maybe I'm going to write a story online about that, make sure that I know that photos are available, and then make it easy through a link or something. But you know what happens sometimes? No joke. I mean, my inbox is constantly filling up. The help desk hates me because I'm always asking for more space in my inbox. But if somebody sends me an enormous file and I'm on the go, like, I might just delete because I have to. So don't let that be the reason why it doesn't get covered.
Yeah, so providing enough information but not being overcomplicated, writing enough about it but not having it be a novel.
Yeah.
The picture thing is an interesting point, I think, because some people might assume, oh, this is a publication, they'll take the photos.
Yeah, look, we don't have, there were days where we had, tons of staff photographers. I mean, at Minneapolis St. Paul Magazine and Twin Cities Business, we have one staff photographer. The vast majority of what we shoot is freelancers that we hire. And every issue, we're looking at what are the stories that we're going to hire out. And I wish we had the resources to shoot everything. We don't. And we do certain studio days. We actually shot your product. You had awesome photos, but we wanted to make it a little more editorial. Yeah. We wanted to do something a little different with it and have beans coming out and make it, so our staff photographer shot it. But yeah, I think especially for online, just because things move so quickly, just having it available, it can kind of give you a little edge. And if we're doing a roundup of 5 new pet products, the ones that have the best photos, let's be honest, they're going to have the best chance of rising to the top just because it looks good.
And would you find that with the latest iPhone, would you find that type of picture would suffice these days? Or is it still something that you recommend somebody has either a photographer come in and take pictures for them so that they have them on hand if they need, or having their own high quality camera? Do you think that the iPhone quality is good enough now, or would you say it kind of needs to be a level beyond that to be effective?
The iPhone is definitely good enough. It's about who's snapping the photo, So yes, there are now, I can't believe it, but there are occasionally photos that end up in print, on those glossy pages that come from an iPhone photo, depending on what the story was and, the timing. Most don't, but it does happen. Certainly resolution wise, yes, it's high enough quality. It's really just about do you know how to do good photos, and is it shot on white, or is the lighting good? But there again, talk about a great opportunity. Do you know Liz Georgie from Suna?
Mm-mm.
Oh my gosh, there's another entrepreneur you need to know. Talk about seeing and identifying the white space. So Liz launched a studio she was in the business of doing, kind of long form videos, storytelling for brands, for big brands like Facebook and stuff like that. Projects that would take weeks and weeks and cost many thousands of dollars. And then there's you and me, and you just want a video clip that you're going to use on the Folly Instagram tomorrow, but you don't have time to produce it. You take it to Suna, and in one day they'll turn it around for you for $100, and it becomes very affordable. So anyway, during the pandemic, they became this destination for product shots because, e-commerce is taking off. Nobody can do anything. No one can stage big shoots. So they are now churning out thousands and thousands of product shoots for brands at a very affordable price. It's brilliant. It's so easy. And it's why didn't I think of that? It's a huge business now.
Yeah, and even when you're talking about credibility, this is something I kind of realized early on. That was I need to have professionally shot photos of our products.
Yeah.
It's easy, especially when you're first starting out, that you're over analyzing every expense. And professionally shot photos, you can find them. With this service now, it sounds like an amazing idea, but you can find independent photographers that are going to do it at a very reasonable price. But when you're kind of looking at every penny spent in the very early days, you're my iPhone's really good. I could probably do it pretty well. If you look at that versus someone who's going to professionally shoot it and edit it, the difference in quality and the things that they know how to do, from color touch up to light correction to even just the background they're using and the lighting that they're using, that was something I realized early on, that a lot of people are going to ask, do you have your product on a white background?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just because it's a visual time. We're living in a visual age, and it makes a difference. And it elevates the brand. It makes it easier it just makes it all easier to get the play, to get shared, to put it out there. So yeah, I mean, I highly recommend, and I hear you. I mean, you do have to analyze every expense. I used to teach these workshops where we would talk about, how does the media work, and how for, new entrepreneurs, how do you connect, and what should you spend money on? And I'd frequently get asked, do I need to hire a professional publicist to represent me? And I'd always say, it really just depends on what your strengths are and what your breaking point is. Can you do your own photography? Sure you can. It's easy to do that these days. Could you do your own podcast? Of course you can. Could you do your own PR? Yes, but you can't do every single thing. And so you have to decide where your time is best spent and which pain points are going to be the most beneficial to outsource.
Especially when you're trying to establish credibility, the things that I was willing to spend money on, even if I couldn't justify an ROI, because that's how I love to justify every spend, is I go, what's the ROI going to end up being on this? Something like a picture, you can't say, well, this picture is going to generate this amount of dollars. But you go, if I get a really high quality product, pending the fact that we don't have any packaging updates, this will be good until there is a packaging design update. Mm-hmm. And so having those professional pictures, even though you can't really quantify it, you'll be able to hold on to those as long as possible. So when you start to think about all the different ways you might use that, whether it's your website, whether it's having pictures on hand for the media, whether it's just sending it to someone as a potential to carry in their store, there's a huge difference between this person from a brand I've never heard of is reaching out to me. It clearly was shot on their iPhone, or at best, it looks like they're good at the iPhone, versus a business reaching out with professionally done pictures. It's just the small, subtle nuances that can kind of separate. Yep. And it's interesting to hear you say it, that like a picture can be the difference of if we're going to write the story or not, because taking pictures isn't just do you have it or not. It's, are we going to send out a photographer who's going to take the pictures, decide which one is best, is going to spend the time editing it on potentially a story that's just more of a little blurb about like, hey, check out this new business. I have to imagine that with the bigger stories that you're covering, when you're thinking about where to allocate those resources as the editor, that you go, even if I want to, even if this is a cool story, the time and resources just aren't there, because that's kind of more of a tail end story versus what's going to be the feature in your monthly publication or your email.
Right. It just, photos elevate everything. I think it makes you look more professional. It just makes it more understandable and accessible to those you're sending it to. They can open your email and right away go, oh, wow, look at that packaging. That's really, they already know your attitude, and it conveys so much just seeing those photos. And yes, unfortunately, I mean, every newsroom in the world is short-staffed and is making decisions on every single story they cover, whether it's going out to shoot it or write it. So I think from a perspective of somebody with a product, anything you can do to put yourself in a better position, do it.
With the stories that you're writing about, how are you, it kind of goes back to a question from earlier, but with the things you're putting out, how much of that is engaging with your existing audience versus bringing something new? Because I would imagine that, and this is just kind of my perception of like writing a story, that the safe bet would be a lot of our readers are bringing this up. And so if we write about it, they'll be very comfortable with the idea. They know what it is. It's something that people are asking for. But if they're asking for it, it means they already know about it, and that you're definitely not going to be the first one to cover or the one that's discovered it, versus writing about something that no one has heard of, that you found on your own or did research to do a new topic that you're not seeing a lot of people talk about. How do you kind of decide what topic on that range of things, from the completely unknown and taking the risk of we think the readers are going to engage with this at a higher level versus things that we know are more established, the readers know about, and they might already be asking for?
Both and, I would say. I mean, for print, we have a limited number of pages. And so in every issue, we want to have a lot of different components. I always want there to be something that's going to surprise and delight and engage and just, maybe either make you think or make you go, oh, wow, I didn't know about that. Or, something that's going to really be insightful. And those are the challenging ones, right? I mean, those are the ones where it's not off a press release. It's not off, and that's about reporting. That's about our resources. That's about knowing people in the community, knowing what's going on and being able to go deep on it and tell you something you didn't already know. That's always our number one goal and challenge. That said, I mean, as a business publication and as one that is on a mission to not just inform or break news, but also to provide context and texture and insight. We've had a lot of conversations more than ever in the last couple of years about, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we know that our audience, we do a lot of panel discussions too, which tells you what people want to know about. And that, big companies might have a DEI officer who's working on some of these things. Mid-sized companies might not, and they have a lot of questions. How can we implement this? How do we actually change culture? I don't have the budget to hire consultants and all that. So those are places where we can be additive, where we can help. We can connect the dots. I can get those chief DEI officers to talk to the smaller companies and help them. And so I think of TCB as being the ultimate connector. And, I want you to get some practical information that's going to help your business. I want you to know about important and interesting people. And I also want to surprise you. I want to do all those things in every issue. And
that to me is the big benefit of a media publication versus using purely social media for your news. One, myself included, everybody follows so many people, and social media all have algorithms to decide what they show you. And then whether it's based on what you're already engaging with or something that they just decide they want to push, they have their own way of testing algorithms to what gets shown to you. Versus the media, now there are people listening, they'll probably be like, this isn't true for the TV shows. Everybody's got their own bias. But for something like Twin Cities Magazine, where you're just objectively covering Twin Cities business, you're going to be exposed to a lot more. And that maybe is where that balance comes in. And even if you're covering something that people already know about, I'm sure part of the goal is can we figure out something about this topic or idea that they're talking about that they didn't know already, or dive deeper into the story, or get a deeper understanding of a person or a business or a strategy.
Thank you. Yes, that's important. Yes, thank you. Yeah, exactly. I would say that, look, social media is wonderful. I love to do the scroll as well. It's useful in my business. It's interesting, but you don't know. We've gotten to a point where we're so far removed from who is the person giving me this information and what is their agenda. Were they paid to say that this was the best burger in town, or do they really mean it? And do they really have the credibility? And what gives them that credibility? Did they go to culinary school? Have they been studying this or writing about it for 10 years? Did they talk to people? Did they compare it? You don't necessarily get that through a TikTok post or an Instagram post. And I think that with publications you still do. And that's why I think even today, in a time when maybe people aren't reading as many newspapers or print publications, you can just see the difference. I mean, when we did our first issue of Stardom, and you asked about reaching new audiences, here's a good example. We launched last fall a business publication that you're going to be in the spring issue called Stardom Men. And that's because entrepreneurship has become so much more important, and we're telling so many stories about startups and innovation. We wanted to kind of give it its own special place and thought there was room in the market to do that. We put Amal Dixit on the cover of the first issue, and it was just so fun to see the reaction. People like, oh, you're on the cover of a magazine. And I'm like, that still matters. That still means something. And it still, can make people excited and gives them a little sense of legitimacy and wow, you should probably look at what he's doing.
And in my opinion, here's why, is because if someone posts about you on social media, you don't know the credibility. Mm-hmm. There's a reason you're editor-in-chief at Twin Cities Business Magazine. It's because you've been in the industry for years. You've built your credibility. If you've gotten to that point, and like we've talked, you've done a lot of work to get there. Versus a social media post, anyone could start. And in fact, everyone has started a food account, has started a business account. If you're on TikTok, there's 10 different people telling you this is how you should invest your money. And you're like, wait a second, why am I listening to this person? I have no idea who they are. And so something like a print magazine, whether it's the digital version or if you actually if you receive the print magazine, as I do still receive magazines, I like to hold magazines when I read them.
Awesome.
That the credibility is the thing that's key there. And I think social media has kind of introduced this idea to younger people especially that's like, you don't need the credibility. Fake it till you make it. And you go, here I am on a podcast that I completely made up with probably zero credibility in this space, but the having no credibility and then speaking to others as if you are a credible source is kind of a dangerous thing in my opinion. Versus having a trusted publication with something like Twin Cities. This sounds like an ad at this point, but there's a reason. And because it is like, why is that important? Why is a magazine cover more important than a feature on somebody with 100,000 followers? It's because you don't really know. And the credibility is kind of what forms that. And I think why it'll always continue to have a space is because an established organization is going to be full of people that if they got hired, they're credible. Versus a social media platform could just purely be, are you really good at social media? Can you get us the stuff that'll get us the most clicks? And even there's a big debate. Well, right. If it's getting a lot of clicks, then that means people are interested in it. But then when you're only doing articles and only doing things for clicks, it becomes an echo chamber where you're just writing exactly what people want to hear. And this is the big thing you see with like TV media on like the 24-hour news networks is you start to see them. Why is this the same topic that I'm seeing two different wild opinions about, even though it should just be coverage of the news and coverage about what is happening?
Look, it's a wonderful time that we live in, and the ability for anybody, you don't have to wait to get a job at a newspaper and be told that you're good enough. You can just start one. You can start a social media account. It's amazing, and I'm all for it. But I think the biggest danger today is that we are all in our own echo chambers, and we are, filtering out whether we're doing it ourselves or the platforms are doing it for us, and only hearing certain voices. And I think the beauty of any kind of legitimate publication is that hopefully you're being exposed to a few ideas or viewpoints that maybe aren't your own and that are enlightening you a little bit.
And the way I view starting your own blog or starting like with this podcast is I never viewed myself as like, I'm now the expert authority opinion on this because I have a microphone in front of me. And I view it almost as like, this is a way to build credibility. Mm-hmm. And things like starting a blog or starting to write your own articles is a great way to learn and a great way to build your credibility. But now I think what's happening a lot of the time is someone goes, now that I have a website with a published article, I'm credible. Versus something like Twin Cities Business Magazine or other publications that are experts on their topic with people with a ton of experience. I think that's just the major difference. And so that's why I was really excited to have you on the podcast today, because when you reached out to me, I was like, you're like, hi, I'm Ali. I was like, yeah, I know. And so it was really cool. The last question I had, and this is just like kind of more out of my personal curiosity, is like, how did you find Folly? Do you remember your first exposure to the brand? Because this is something I think about a lot, is kind of whether it's customer or just brand awareness, is like, what is that journey that people have to find you out in the first place? Because to this day, I still get surprised when someone's like, oh, I've heard of that. I'm like, that seems weird. Here comes my...
You have to stop thinking that's weird.
Like, here comes my imposter syndrome. Here's a kicking in. I'm just going to go into this corner really quick. I'm curious if you remember how you kind of found Folly in the first place.
I think I probably saw it on the shelves, probably at... Byerly's, yeah. I'm going to guess. That was probably the first place. I know I've seen it at Angel, what's the
Angel Food.
Yeah, Angel Food, because it's like really prominently displayed on their cute walls there. But honestly, I have to give credit to my dear friend and longtime colleague, Stephanie March, food and dining editor, because we, in Start MN, we do kind of a branding page where we look at the pack. It is more about the packaging packaging, this particular why is it this way? What does it mean? And the whole idea is to show, kind of like we've been talking about, that every aspect of it matters, right? You want people to get to the coffee and love the coffee, but if they don't pick it off the shelf, they're never going to experience it, right? So how do you do that? And that was the story that I talked to you about. And as we were just brainstorming, like, who would be a good packaging story? What is dynamic packaging? And we were just thinking about the options for the next issue. And she was like, what about Folly? And I was like, oh my God, perfect.
That's awesome. It's funny you say that it is about the packaging, which, of course, if you've listened to this or if you know me, I'm obsessed with like packaging, design, just any product. I think it's fascinating that your limited use of space, what you choose, and more importantly, choose not to use on the packaging. And when I went to our head roaster, Jeff, I was like, we're going to be featured in Twin Cities Business Magazine. He was like, oh, cool. What for? I was like, the packaging. He's like, oh, okay. I was like, no, this is a good thing, Jeff, because then they're going to find out about it, and then they get the coffee.
Totally. And then it makes you more intrigued to try the coffee. But you have so many amazing insights about the package that it was so fun to hear and understand how it came together, and deciding to do a scowl or a frown. Like, that's ballsy to do that. And it was really cool to hear about, and I hope everybody will enjoy the article.
Oh, no, I'm very excited about it. But that interaction just about sums up how Folly works. I'm beyond stoked. Got off that phone call, went back into the roaster. I was like, oh my God, that was such a great conversation.
Yeah.
And then he's like, does it affect coffee? All right, I'm gonna go back to roasting.
We all have our angle, and it's important to have all of those different mindsets in the room.
That's who you want to be your head roaster. You don't want a head roaster getting too excited about packaging. You want them to know that it's what's in the packaging that's important. And I'll make sure the other side hopefully works out. So
there you go.
It was really awesome to see that email come, and that was like a holy shit moment for me. That's like, I can't believe she's reaching out for this. And I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. It's been a blast. And I think there's some really awesome insights, some good takeaways, like how can a business even just little simple things like a picture or the length of your communication, or you're trying to become like newsworthy, or what is news. And I'm really excited for that issue to come out. But thanks for coming on today.
Oh, thanks for having me. So much fun to talk about this stuff.
Absolutely. I'll end it like I do every other episode and say, have a nice